Could you please highlight any specific success or any project that you believe has a significant impact on advancing gender equality and human security in these organizations?
Mm. I think the different mechanisms and processes over the year. I mean, first of all, the adoption
So, your
in me.
research delves into the intersection of gender and hybrid warfare. So, could you please share some government steps or international bodies should take what steps to address these unique challenges, and what hybrid warfare is and how gender plays role into this?
So hybrid security threats, which we've seen most recently, um, and is going to become as we move forward, it's become more and more present. The idea that sort of traditional kinetic engagement on the ground. Um, My name is Clare Hutchinson, and I am currently the founder and operator of a consultancy called Redhead Consultancy, which works as in expertise in human security and women, peace and security analysis and policy development and advice. Previously, I was the NATO Secretary General Special Representative for Women, Peace and Security, where I worked also established the Human Security Unit in NATO and worked across the alliance on women, peace and security guidance and doctrine and implementing the UN resolutions on women, peace and security. And then before that, I worked as the UN senior UN gender advisor for 15 years with the peacekeeping department, and worked in a number of missions, again implementing gender mainstreaming and gender integration. And then before that, I worked as a risk and communication security advisor with different governmental and private organizations.
Oh, wow, it seems you have achieved so many things.
It's been
Great.
a long journey, indeed.
Yes. Yes. So, can you share some of your insights from your extensive experience in gender defense and security and how the landscape evolved over the past 2 decades, and what are the major challenges you observed?
Mhm. Well, initially, gender was not seen as anything near a security, even though it has the title security. It was not seen as a security or defense issue. It was seen as a woman's issue that was in development, and that it was separate to the core of security analysis. By about 2000, probably 12, 13, that started to change, where it was taken out of the idea of humanitarianism and then moved a little bit into security. And that became just as a normal progression, because the way the world was changing, we started noticing that you can't separate women. So women are both victims, but they're also perpetrators in many cases of violence in conflict situations, but also that you can't ignore 50% of the population in defense, in security, in anything. So the whole spectrum of gender and women, peace and security has changed quite dramatically over the last 20, 22, 23 years. And become more centralized to conversations on security and on the discourse on security. The problem is, and the challenges remain, that it's not serious enough for some. So it's not, while it has moved forward, it's still separate in many minds. And there's a tokenism around it where it's now become, it's important to do, let's tick a box, absolutely, we have equality. But when the real issues hit, for example, Ukraine, most recently, we saw gender missing from the response. We saw gender missing from a lot of the conversations, apart from more women were being in the military, but then they were being essentialized. So I think we still have a long way to go in really putting the issue and the areas of gender at the center, a core of defense and security in a genuine and authentic way that makes sense.
Absolutely. You highlight a very major point, and I believe the world need to address on it. So you, like you mentioned, your work involves collaboration with UN, NATO, like with the very highly valued organizations. So could you please highlight any specific success or any project that you believe has a significant impact on advancing gender equality and human security in these organizations?
Mm. I think the different mechanisms and processes over the year. I mean, first of all, the adoption in NATO of doctrine or of policies and guidance, but in the UN of the resolutions. I mean, the evolution of resolutions, as we've seen from 1325 being the first one, which was quite weak in a way, to the stronger language as you went through, has laid the groundwork. Then the different action plans that have been put out, and things like national action plans, that which I have a tenuous relationship with, but I think they definitely have a merit in making a normative structure. And so the different areas, the written, the narrative, the legal, the instrumentalization within the framework of legal in different nations have made a big change, and they are the areas that have stabilized some of this. Sorry, what was your follow-on question? What was the question after that?
Like any success story that you think,
Yeah.
or any project you worked on that you think had a
Yeah.
significant impact on advancing gender equality and
Yeah.
human security.
Right. And so in terms of the action plan, I mean, the action plan, I developed the action plan and the policy in NATO, and that was, I think, quite successful in framing the language in a different way. I think also the development of focal points and networks. In both NATO and the UN created a network of senior focal points, and in NATO a leadership task force. Leadership is critical, and I also did the leadership in the UN, institutionalized a leadership network. You cannot make this work unless people in power are going to push it. And that to me is always been critical, has always been the focus of the work I do, because I have seen it when I used to train, especially with the military. If the commander sat in the training, if the commander was present at the training, everybody turned up. If the head of the USG of peacekeeping is present, everybody will be there. One, because everyone wants to be seen, but two, also because they feel it must be important if the highest person's there. And so this is really, I think, one of the biggest success factors, is getting those in charge to champion this. And then the idea of just changing also mindsets and language. In NATO, I created a language manual, which was changing the language and changing how we spoke, because while many people may think that's irrelevant, your first line is, how do you speak? It's be it with race or religion or gender, and how you speak transfers who is important, how it's important, what's important. And so making that powerful shift in language is, to me, one of the most critical things. And the language manual was very successful, and it was used by the ambassadors at the council. It was used widely, and by divisions. And then the thing I think has been successful has been recognition. And so I started a process of recognition in NATO of the best division that was implementing. And the best division wasn't always the one who did the most. It was the one that showed the most promise. Because I think when you're struggling and you have lots of obstacles, but you're still trying, that has to be recognized. Quite often we only recognize people who've done great things, that have achieved the most. But we should also recognize, and this isn't anything, I think, in universities and in colleges and schools and families, recognize those who struggle because they are trying. And sometimes trying against the greatest odds is probably much more of a powerful response than if things are easier and you can just put it in. Saying, oh, well, it's great because human resources has changed their recruitment is not as great as somebody who works in defense investment trying to get changes through when it's a hugely patriarchal or the structure pushes back and there's resistance. So I think the idea of identifying change makers and helping change makers is one of the biggest successes as well.
Yes. So you highlight the very important part of change makers, and that's very true that it's very important to be a change maker or to get inspired by the change maker in order to change the world or to bring more security towards the women. So your research delves into the intersection of gender and hybrid warfare. So could you please share some government steps or international bodies should take what steps to address these unique challenges, and what hybrid warfare is and how gender plays role into this?
So hybrid security threats, which we've seen most recently, and is going to become as we move forward, it's become more and more present. The idea that sort of traditional kinetic engagement on the ground we had never thought would probably happen again in our lives in Europe, and it has, but it's not on its own, and it is very much about the hybrid, about using other tools, misinformation, disinformation, about using in a way artificial intelligence, other areas of warfare that affect not only troops on the ground, but as we've seen, civilian casualties much, much more, which has been a change in warfare over the last 20 odd years. Recognizing the differences in conflict, and recognizing the differences in crisis and war, and making sure that we have a response that's gendered, that is a human security response, is going to be more and more essential, because in things like hybrid warfare, the civilians are very much the prime of this, the areas of attack in a way. We look at misinformation or disinformation, where one of the interesting things is that women are more likely to believe things and to share things they see online than men are. And this is maybe simply because they're not as used to online information, or could be possibly more trusting, or there's all those gender things you'd have to work through. But also that women can be very much agents in this. And there was a interesting study done in Estonia by a Center of Excellence on hybrid, on cyber, and where they paid some students to see if they could find out where the nearest military exercise was taking place. And it took them, I think, half an hour. It's online, the information is there, you can see it. It took them about half an hour to identify. So women were being used as honeypots. So they were going out and asking these, soldiers, and flirting with them, and chatting with them online. And they got them to reveal their location. So the idea that also understanding women's role, specifically women and girls' role in online threats, is not where it should be, but it is growing and growing and growing. And our response is a little limited internationally to that. So there's a new way of defense, there's a new way of conflict, there's a new way of security that is growing. And I think it's surpassing our understanding, so that we do need to do more work getting to grips with how do we prevent some of these areas of conflict.
Got it. So I was not aware of this hybrid warfare and intersection of gender part. So thank you for telling about it. So your work extends to human security issues, including children in armed conflict or sexual violence in conflict. So could you please tell on the long-term impact of these issues on societies and how they intersect with women roles and their security and how international law or policy are playing important role in addressing these issues?
Sure. So human security is defined by many different organizations. For NATO, I had put in 5 specific areas that NATO is already working on. But it's different for the UN, it's different for the EU, it's different. One thing that is not included that should be in human security is climate change and food insecurity, which I think these are 2 major areas of insecurity globally, and probably one of the most fundamental that impact everything else. But conflict-related sexual violence and children on conflict and trafficking are 3 of the biggest areas for NATO, which are under an umbrella of protection of civilians. And the idea that in children on conflict that you have children, and that's anyone under the age of 18, who either are targeted sexually as a weapon in conflict, or are recruited as child soldiers because they are forced to, or their families have been killed, they have no other options, and then they're used in armed conflict as weapons again. Sexual violence that women, but men as well, are targeted as a weapon of war with their bodies. These all impact not only peace and security, but they impact about how do we resolve our understanding of conflict and what do we do, because the output of all of these is that there's a direct and indirect link to security, to peace, and to the progression of societies in peaceful times. If you don't address it when women have been raped in conflict and they have children born of rape and they're ostracized and stigmatized from their communities, the children grow up with no other options but to join armed groups because nobody else will welcome them. Children on conflict, when they grow up, when they have been children and they as armed soldiers, as little soldiers, and they're demobilized, the societies don't want them back. And so what do they do? So the continuation of conflict happens because we do not deal with the outcome of all of these atrocities in a way. And the same as trafficking. When someone's been trafficked, getting them back into their society is very, very difficult. And so we have a plethora of resolutions and laws and doctrine and structures and frameworks to deal with it. But a lot of this is about, for me, making the connection at the highest political level of why this is a security and political issue and why it is a link to ongoing conflict. This isn't a woman's issue. It isn't a child's issue. This is a societal issue and an issue of war. And if we ignore it to the extent where I think we have, while we do have, UN seized of this matter, that the Security Council, that there's a Secretary General report in it, it still happens. And it still happens because women and boys and girls are still the most at-risk people in the world, that they are not often protected by legal structures. They are not protected. I mean, up to the age of 18, you don't have the same legal recourse as an adult. And women and the societal norms that don't allow women to have independence and autonomy and agency in their lives allows for sexual violence to happen. And sexual violence is still not taken seriously. And we have a lot more work to do on that.
Yes, until you mentioned these points, I realized how important is this issue is, and how we people are, just generally speaking or in our daily lives and just ignoring it after speaking. We're not taking it that much seriously, and we are just like in today's like coming generation is also need to work on it and need to make the society and the people living in the society in a safer way, so that all people can live with each other happily and in a safer way. So thank you so much for highlighting all these issues. I believe this is my one of the my best podcast in which I am able to learn so many things, and me as a teenager and many other people need to work on it. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And it's good to ask the questions and to raise the issues, because that's the way that we make change. And if
Yes,
we don't
absolutely.
know what the problems are, we can't make the change we need to. So
Yes.
you all the best in change making
Yes, thank
and
you.
bringing these issues to the fore.
Thank you. Thank you so much.